Howdy, howdy, everybody. Why, as a matter of fact, this is Fanboy Radio. My name is Scott.
And I'm Oliver.
And we have some amazing news for you today. We do have both Sean and TJ on the line, and we have Meg and Britta taking your calls at 817-257-7631. And our guest today, on today's show, is a man that most of the world of comics considers to be our greatest writer, our greatest creator. Alan Moore is the man behind Watchmen, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, From Hell, V for Vendetta, and most recently, Lost Girls. Alan Moore, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Hi, it's my pleasure.
Well, you're such an important writer to our audience, to us.
Yes.
It's an honor to have you. You were very instrumental in bridging the gap between comic books and literature. Do you actively try to raise the sophistication level, or is it just something that comes naturally? Is it just something that is what you would do on any given day in your writing?
Oh, you guys. Yeah. No, I mean, I suppose it's basically, it is an agenda.
Yes.
But it's an agenda that probably just grows out of the way that I write and the way that I am. I think that when I first got into comics when I first started to read comics, I was 7. But by the age of about 14, I started to get into the British fan scene, which was just starting up around then. And it was very different to the American fan scene. The American fan scene had kind of kicked off in the late 50s with the EC fan magazines.
Right.
Whereas by the time you'd got things like the excellent Alter Ego coming out from Jerry Bales and Roy Thomas, at the very origins of American fan culture, it was kind of nostalgic. It was already looking backward to a golden age that had disappeared. Whereas the British fan scene kind of started in 1967, which more or less tells you all you need to know about it. It was right in the swim of the entire hippie period and the 60s explosion, when there was a generally progressive agenda. Mm-hmm. Everybody over here was a proto-hippie, everybody who was involved in the comic scene. And I think that it was just, everybody accepted that the thing to do with comics was to progress them, to see if you could push them forward into genuinely grown-up territory, genuinely artistic territory. And I think a lot of the people who were around at those first couple of British comic conventions are the people who've since gone on to be, people like Dave Gibbons, people like Brian Bolland, various people without whom the shape of comics over the last 20, 25 years would be completely different. So, it's something that it comes out of what I am personally, but it is also a kind of an agenda. It's just the way that I tend to be with any kind of art that I turn my hand to. I'd like to try and progress it into something that hasn't been done before, because if you're doing something that has been done before, it's kind of boring. It's a bit difficult to keep up the enthusiasm if you're just basically repeating the sort of the same shapes that you've made before or that other people have made before.
Sure.
So it is a kind of a conscious thing upon my part, but at the same time, it does kind of grow out of what I am and what my interests are.
Well, your work, I think, if you view it as a window into what you're about, which I think you have to, you have a very, very broad, sophisticated kind of sensibility. It seems like a lot of people have kind of jumped on that bandwagon trying to ape that sensibility. And because of it, the comics that have been released since that time period have become more adult, more sophisticated. Do you think that it's gone too far? Do you think people have pushed what you did in trying to run with it too far in that direction, not seeing the totality of your work?
Well, I know what you mean. Certainly, at least after Watchmen, there was something of a deluge of comics that were picking up from Watchmen, shall we say.
Yes.
But whereas I think that both me and David hoped that what people took from Watchmen would be the interesting things that we'd done with storytelling, or some of the stuff that was really important to us about Watchmen. You know, the stylistic things.
Uh-huh.
We thought that if people were to sort of take some of the genuinely progressive attitude of Watchmen and try and apply it to their own ideas, there could be some fantastic things emerging. What we tended to see was a lot of people who seemed to have only taken from Watchmen what was kind of obvious and on the surface. You know, we have a psychopathic character in Watchmen, so therefore, and he's a very popular character, so therefore that seemed to condemn the comic industry to a couple of decades of psychopathic heroes, which was never what me and David intended. It also tended to make comics, I think, a lot more pretentious and very dark. I mean, I think that in all of my comics work, or at least in most of it, Watchmen included, yes, we did have very, very grim episodes, but there were very uplifting episodes often in the next issue.
Well, adult or mature doesn't necessarily mean smart.
Of course, and it doesn't. I'm not sure what mature actually does mean. It certainly doesn't necessarily mean smart. It doesn't necessarily mean grown up. It seems to be a kind of marketing phrase that is thrown out there in the vain hope that this will fend off prosecution if and when it comes, you know. But I don't know. I mean, I think that if anything, the influence of my work upon comics, yes, it's pushed the medium through into a couple of new areas, but really, when I look at the work that is most obviously influenced by mine, I'm afraid that I find nothing in it to interest me. It seems to be, rather than following their own agendas, people seem to be following my agendas, or basically my agendas from 25 years ago. It's kind of, I'd hoped for more with comics. I mean, nothing delights me more than to see somebody who's clearly never paid any attention to my work. Or if they have looked at it, taken what they can from it, and then gone on to do something of their own. I mean, like, say, for example, Neil Gaiman. Now, when Neil first started in the comics industry, I was the person who was sending or recommending that he send his work to Vertigo or whoever. And I think at the beginning, Neil would admit that for his first couple of stories, then I'd probably got quite a big influence upon him. But Neil was somebody who went on very quickly to find his own voice.
Yes.
And to do stories that some of which I would have liked to have done because they're very good stories, but which I never would have done because Neil has got completely different sensibilities to me. And he's not been afraid to express that. You know, you should always have confidence in your own ideas. I mean, I've got a very useful set of oblique strategy cards, which was something that Brian Eno, the ambient musician, created in 1975. And it's a set of instructions where if you're getting stuck with a piece of work, you just shuffle these cards, take one out at random, and see how the line of type on the card applies to what your creative dilemma is. And I remember that one of them just said, you shouldn't be afraid to use your own ideas, which I think is very, very useful. I think people should remember that. There's nothing wrong with being influenced by people. Of course, we're all influenced by people. But if you're going to be influenced by people, try to be influenced by hundreds of people rather than just one. Because if you're influenced by a huge amount of people, then no one influence is going to be overriding, and you're probably going to have a much better chance of actually coming up with something that is your own style, where you can say what you want to say in your own voice rather than in somebody else's voice that was popular 25 years ago, you know.
We are speaking with Alan Moore here on Fanboy Radio. We're taking your calls. Eventually, we're a little bit greedy.
Yes, we get to go first because it's our show. But we've got so many calls and so many emails. I'm going to try to get to some of the questions we got offline or off our online sources. Lindsay from Perth, Australia asks, why comics? Your skill for breaking down genres and attacking themes from such complex angles is well documented. What does the comics medium provide that may be lacking in the vast range of available presentations for your work?
Well, that's a very good question.
It's brilliant.
I would have to say that I'm interested in a huge number of different art forms. I'm not saying that I'm terribly good in all of them, but I like to play in all of them. For about the past 18 months, I've been working solely upon this new novel, Jerusalem, where I've been relearning just what a lot of pleasure there is to be had in the simple use of words. That said, 18 months working upon one thing is as long as I've ever worked upon anything, uninterrupted. And I was starting to find that I was getting a little bit tired, perhaps a little bit flat. Some of the writing didn't seem to quite sparkle and resonate the way that I wanted it to. But luckily, at that point, Kevin O'Neill was in need. He's coming to the end of the Black Dossier, and he was in need of the script for Volume 3 of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So after this huge break, I plunged back into comics. And I remembered exactly why I had always loved the medium. There are things that you can do in literature that you can't do in comics. But there are things that you can do in comics that you cannot do in literature. The amount of information that you can get into the comic medium is astonishing. The way that you can get that information to lodge in your reader's mind by using imagery to underline the words is also astonishing. A further project that I've just started last weekend, it's something that's been brewing for a long time, but we finally signed the contract for me and Steve Moore to write the Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic, which is,
wow.
It's going to be my no-nonsense, one-stop grimoire. This will take a few years. It's 312 pages. We've got it pretty well planned out. But one of the things that we were doing in that is a series that will be scattered throughout the book, which is basically entitled The Lives of the Great Enchanters, where we will be taking all of these various figures, starting with the dancing sorcerer figure that was found painted on a cave wall at Le Trois in France, and we move on through real and fictional magicians up to the 21st century. But me and Steve were working upon one of these at the weekend. We were working upon the entry for the Persian Magi, where there's an awful lot of interesting stuff to get over in one page of comic strip. Now, that's got a maximum of about 210 words, and we thought 5 images. And yet we were able to get this astonishing amount of hard information, of opinion, of nuance, because of the incredible elasticity of the comics medium. And like I say, if we just had those 210 words on their own, yes, the information would have been pretty much the same, but it would have been very dense and very dry, and I doubt that the readers would be able to take it in the same way that they're going to be able to when we've got some exquisite artist drawing the imagery, and where every little chunk of information is connected to a picture in the reader's mind. That will give them stuff that they'll be able to remember for years. And that, to me, yeah, there are a lot of other reasons why comics is a fantastic medium, but that, to me, has got to be one of the strongest reasons why I continue to work in comics so predominantly. It's simply because they're an almost unequaled way of getting over precisely what you mean to say in a way that it's going to stick with the reader.
We really could talk about navigating through comics and creating comics as a whole for the entire hour. We do have a lot of calls, and they're probably getting very mad at us.
Well, let's go to the first call.
Britta, or actually Sean.
Yes, we're finally here.
Yes.
Our first caller is Brad from Minnesota.
Brad, you're on FBR with Alan Moore. What's up?
Hey, not much. Big fan, and just had a question of what was your goal in getting into comics, and have you accomplished that? And,
well, Brad, actually, my goal getting into comics was to try and earn £45 a week, which was what I was drawing in what you'd call Social Security over there. And I figured that if I could actually earn that much, then I could legitimately become an honest man. I could work as a sort of a comics writer and hopefully feed my family. I didn't expect it to last for very long. I mean, we're talking back 1979. I thought that if I could manage to support my family for perhaps 6 months, a year, by just the power of my own writing or artwork, which wasn't up to much at that time, quite frankly, then I'd be a happy man. But when that turned out to work, I started to think more seriously about what I wanted to do in comics. And I suppose that what I wanted to do was to be able to tell meaningful stories that might have an effect upon the people reading them. And in that way, you might, in some small measure, be able to in some way help the entire culture along, even if it was only by putting your shoulder to the wheel and giving a little bit of effort. If it just rolled things forward a little bit, then I kind of think that that's everybody's human duty, really. And, of course, different people have different ways in which they can contribute something to the world. But, I mean, as far as I was concerned, I didn't really have the physique or wherewithal to become a masked crime fighter, say. So I thought that probably writing about them would be a better option. So that answers your question, Brad.
It does. It does. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the call, Brad.
817-257-7631. Get that free line while you can.
Yes, I'm going to try to hit up one of the others from the message boards while we have a chance here.
Before we get to Lost Girls.
Yeah, because we're about to hit Lost Girls, and I think there's going to be a lot going on there. So Eric from Massachusetts asks, a lot of people say that you're the greatest comic book writer ever, and in parentheses, I completely agree with that. But how does it feel to have that kind of fan base? Does it add any pressure when you sit down and write new stuff?
Basically, you have to forget all of that. Yeah, it's always very nice to hear it. Sincerely, it is nice. Of course it's nice. That it makes me feel big and important. And, you know, we could all use some of that once in a while. But I really can't afford to think about that at all. I mean, I do, you'll perhaps have noticed, tend to keep very distant from the entire comic book scene. And that's not because I've got any great distaste for my audience or anything like that. It's simply because I can't afford to be thinking about my position in comics or anything like that when I'm actually supposed to be concentrating upon the work in hand.
Sure.
So this is why I live in Northampton and why I make very few public appearances and very few of them are comic related.
It keeps you pure.
Well, yeah, and it keeps me balanced, and I remain the same thing as I've ever been, which is a man with a notepad and a ballpoint pen. You know.
Well, we are broadcasting out of Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, as well as a few other markets, and we are currently at the buckle of the Bible Belt, Alan, and so let's keep that in mind as we discuss your latest work, Lost Girls.
Certainly.
Lost Girls, it depicts the sexual adventures of 3 female characters from children's literature: Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, Alice from Alice Adventures in Wonderland, and Wendy Darling from Peter Pan. What else do we need to know?
Well, it is a work of pornography, which I hope hasn't caused too many palpitations there in the Bible Belt.
I almost fell over right there.
Yes,
I really did.
the entire state palpitated.
Which, oddly enough, is in the book.
Basically, the intention behind Lost Girls was that, for one thing, I didn't see why it was possible to have endless stories about violence when stories about sexual relationships between people were apparently taboo, were to be relegated to this despised and ugly under-the-counter genre. I couldn't quite see why that should be, and it struck us that it might be possible to do something which was about sex, which was joyous and uplifting and intelligent, and which did all of the things that you would expect any work of art or any novel to do. So, I mean, we decided upon those 3 children's characters because we realized that they provided perfect metaphors for the basic way in which all human beings, any one of us, when we enter into the world of sexuality, it is a very confusing place. It is as if, just like Alice or Dorothy or Wendy, we've been picked up from our innocent childhood and have been placed into a world where all of the laws are different, where the way that we talk, the way that we act, the way that everybody around us acts is more like the logic of the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland than it is the normal life that we've previously known. So we realised that these 3 girls provided an incredible metaphor for the way in which sex deranges all of us upon our first contact with it. And, so we decided to take that idea and run with it, and what ended up was Lost Girls.
So that's why they are lost, is because they are in something new.
Well, it's the idea that all of us, to a degree, we lose something. When we enter sex, there's a kind of a trade-off going on there that we're not necessarily aware of when we do so. I mean, we're adolescents. We've got the world of sexuality spread out in front of us, advertised to us in every magazine image, under the surface of every movie. You know, we're living in a highly sexualized society where sexual imagery is pretty much pumped at us 24 hours a day. So to the adolescent looking at that fantastic sexual treasure trove laying in front of them, of course, they can't wait to run bounding into the surf of the sexual experience and just immerse themselves in it. But there is a trade-off. You're never going to be a child again. You're never going to have the perspective upon life that you had before that experience. That's not to say that it's a bad experience. Of course, it's a necessary one. But you will change. There will be something of the person that you were that is lost. And so to some degree, what we're talking about in Lost Girls is these 3 women who have a part of themselves which is somehow missing, which for various reasons they've shut away. And in the course of Lost Girls, it's about their reintegration, if you like, with the missing parts of themselves, with the girls inside these women that have been lost, you know.
Well, I've got a question. I kind of want to follow that up, but I also don't want to lose track of these phone calls we've got, so I guess we'll try to hit one of those right now.
Sure.
Yeah,
Who's
got
next?
Yair from New York.
Yair from New York. What's up, man? You're on FBR with Alan Moore. What's on your mind?
Hi, it's a great privilege to be calling to Mr. Moore. Based on Alan, based on the recent announcement of your retirement, and considering that there's still works of yours being published, do you feel that you still communicated everything that you've been interested in doing in comics, or are you, going to stop?
No, that's a good question. I mean, my retirement, which took place about 18 months ago, was purely a retirement from mainstream comics and from the relentless deadlines and the sense of responsibility, because you're keenly aware that you are responsible for putting bread upon the table of all the artists who've been foolish enough to work with you. And if you're not getting the script to them, they can't do their work. And basically, that was the only part of the equation that I was ever concerned about. I mean, this probably sounds terrible, but I was never interested in meeting the deadlines for the sake of the publishers or even the readers, because I figured that most of the readers, they're not going to be that bothered. You know, people aren't going to be looking through one of those League of Extraordinary Gentlemen volumes in 5 years' time and think, this looks really great. It's a pity that Kevin O'Neill couldn't have finished drawing it 3 months earlier, because that will be completely irrelevant by then. So that was the sort of pressure that was building up upon me, and that was why I decided to get out of that kind of mainstream treadmill so that I could concentrate purely upon the projects that were dear to my heart, which include, in the comics sense, they include the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which there are still plenty of stories that I would enjoy telling. I mean, we've got the whole world of fiction from one end of time to the other. So I don't really see any reason why, barring something terrible happening to either me or Kevin, why we need ever sort of run out of ideas on that particular series. Apart from that, I'd always intended to finally put my money where my mouth was and produce this big book of magic that I was talking about earlier.
With Steve Moore.
That's not entirely comic strip, but there is a substantial part of it that is told in various comic strip styles. So the way I'm kind of seeing it at the moment is that I just want to be a creator from now on without anything specific to qualify that. So if I want to create some more comics or some more books or some weird hybrids between the two, or if I want to do some more music or some more performance, then I'll just have a number of different strings to my bow so that I can choose which medium is most appropriate. But comics is such a good medium that I doubt that I'm going to run out of things to say using that medium for a good while yet.
Excellent. We have more calls.
Thank you so much for the phone call. We're going to the next phone call right away.
That's Goddard from Philly.
Goddard, you're on FBR with Alan Moore. What's up?
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
My question is not really a question. It's just sort of a comment. Is anybody who's really seen any of your drawings, which there aren't a lot out there, but it sort of shows an influence that a lot of people might not associate with you, which is sort of like the 60s underground movement, sort of Zap, arcade, stuff like that. I was wondering if you could talk about how that stuff might have influenced you.
Well, that stuff has influenced me incredibly, and probably more than anything else. I mean, it probably would be more evident to people seeing my various attempts at psychedelic artwork. But that decade of my life was the one where I was forming my personality. I suspect it's probably true of everybody that, that going through that period, late childhood and your teenage years, that's where you probably soak up most of the influences that are going to determine the kind of person that you end up being. And so, I mean, basically, I was always in awe of the Californian underground artists. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an underground artist. So my first attempts over here were writing and drawing my own comic strips for a music paper, which was about as close as we could get to a kind of an underground sensibility over here. This was in the late 70s. And when I realised that I actually couldn't draw very well, I switched over to writing, and I tried to bring an awful lot of that progressive underground sensibility with me and try and bring that to mainstream comics. I mean, me and Melinda were talking just the other night. This is after having finished working on Lost Girls for 16 or 17 years and having seen it published and finally getting to sit down and read it. And I'd finally noticed what a profoundly hippie piece of work it is. All of the main themes of the 1960s, the Art Nouveau that everything was sort of draped in during the psychedelic era, the somewhat lax attitude to drugs that is portrayed at various points throughout Lost Girls, the very pro-sex attitude, and of course, I mean, the very fact that we're using Victorian children's characters like Alice in Wonderland, who was a huge icon in the 1960s, Jefferson Aeroplane and White Rabbit and all the rest of it. And of course, at the end of the day, the basic message of Lost Girls could be boiled down to make love, not war. And I've often thought that if me and Melinda had just managed to buy a badge-making machine 16 or 17 years ago, we could have probably saved ourselves a lot of trouble. Although, you know, I think that in Lost Girls, we've managed to unpack that idea a bit more spectacularly and at greater length. But yeah, I mean, I think that the influence of the 1960s is certainly, it's all over my work. And of course, if people could actually see me in the flesh, it would be even more obvious.
You're our John Lennon. Too far?
What did you say? Sorry.
Oh, then he said it, and then he retreated. He said he went too far.
I said, is that too far to call you our John Lennon?
Well, what do you mean, our Yankee? You know, like you've already had one of our John Lennons.
Oh,
Kim.
You can't co-opt all their guys.
No, I mean, look,
Comics' John Lennon.
Well, yeah, I suppose
okay.
so. I suppose so. I mean, although, you know, John Lennon, yeah, he was a great influence upon me, the same as he was with everybody. And the Beatles, certainly, that whole psychedelic swirl of those kind of late 60s recordings, fantastic. It stamps itself upon your mind. But I would point out with John Lennon, not wishing to besmirch the reputation of someone who's not here to defend themselves, but John Lennon was the only one of the Beatles who actually recorded a song saying that a working-class hero was something to be. And he was the only one of the Beatles who I believe wasn't born in the working-class hellhole of Toxteth, Liverpool 8. He had quite a comfortable life with his Auntie Mimi up Menlove Avenue in the more middle-class areas of Liverpool. So although I identify with John Lennon's lyricism and his kind of his defiance, at the same time I would point out that the genuine working-class heroes were probably the other three Beatles. And so with my background, I perhaps tend to I identify with them just as much as I identify with John Lennon. But thank you. That's a very nice thing to say.
Well, I'd like to thank Goddard for his phone call, by the way, as well.
Yes.
And like to remind everybody, you're listening to Fanboy Radio.
The voice of comics.
On KTCU 88.7 FM, The Choice.
And we're speaking with Alan Moore, and so is our next caller.
If he's the John Lennon of comics, this is the Pete Best of comics we have on the phone here. Umar from New York. What's up, brother?
Okay. You know, I'm like the greatest, biggest fan here, so my head did explode, just like Scott's did on the cartoon. Mr. Moore, got two questions. Scott, what's up with Prison Break? Okay. I read and heard a couple of times that they said that you did not like superheroes as one of the greatest superhero writers. Is that true, and how do you reconcile that? Second question, and then I'm hanging up so I can listen and be in awe. Is there any chance of a Miracle Man collection or an absolute? Because that's one of my utmost favorite comics you've ever written. Thank you very much. And your Just Dress. Love those two. Okay.
Right. Okay, let me see. Now, as regards superheroes, no, I do not hate superheroes because I've got too much respect for the wonderful stories that warmed and illuminated my childhood. However, I do think that the superhero industry, as it stands today, has gone well beyond a joke, and I am not really interested in it anymore, simply because, to a large degree, it's too painful. I know this sounds melodramatic, but I find it ever so difficult these days to look at any of these previously beloved superhero icons of my youth without seeing a huge queue of cheated old men standing behind them in ghostly form. It's just got to the point where I've kind of realised that all of these movie franchises that are around these days, they haven't benefited the people who created those characters, not the ones who really created them. So it's that has given me a distaste for the superhero industry, although, yeah, there is still, I'm sure, much fun to be had with the superhero as a figure. I doubt that I'll be delving much into that area in the future, although who knows? You know,
who knows?
There's always possible surprises up the road in the future there.
That's true, because in my opinion, you've written the best Superman story of all time, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and in many people's perception, and as my own, the best Batman story of all time, The Killing Joke. Now, if in the past you talked about how you would not return basically because of deadlines, because of the way the business is run, what if the people in charge gave you a clean slate to do anything you want as long as you did something with them? Would you return?
I really do have no. You're not going to see this happening because I could not work with any of the major comic companies, and I have no interest in recycling their characters anymore.
There you go.
So anything that is going to be done by me in the future is going to be stuff that I own and own in perpetuity. I mean, now, with the second question there regarding Marvel Man, this is quite interesting because a couple of days ago I went down to a local recording studio where they were going to be filming an interview with me relating to Mr. Mick Anglo, who was the original creator of Marvel Man, and who I created my revival of Marvel Man in the early 80s on the understanding that this character had lapsed into receivership with the bankruptcy of the company that had published his adventures. And that was the entire basis upon which I wrote all of my Marvel Man stories, and which, when I handed over the character to Neil Gaiman, on which Neil wrote all of his. We've since found out that apparently this was all a pack of lies from the beginning.
Oh.
That Mick Anglo had always owned Marvel Man, that the company that published him had not gone bankrupt, that the rights to Marvel Man had always, or should always, have been with Mick Anglo, And Mick Anglo's now 90. He's looking after his equally aged wife, and he could do with a bit of support. And there are some people who are helping him try to win back the rights that were taken away from him. Now, if that gets resolved, then I suppose in the future there would be some possibility of, with Mick Anglo's approval, of then putting the Marvel Man material into some available form. At the moment, with all of the various people claiming ownership of something which was, as it turns out, apparently Mick Anglo's all the time, this is probably not the time to actually talk about any possibilities or details. But
Sure.
yeah, it's a work that I remain very proud of, and which I was pleased to learn that Mick Anglo himself had also enjoyed a great deal. That meant a lot to me. So if all of this ungodly mess gets sorted out, and if it ends up as it should do, with Mick Anglo having the rights to Marvel Man returned to him free and clear, then who knows what the possibilities might be in the future. But it would be, if the book ever does come out, it will be free of any of these rather shady complications that have hung over the character for the past 20 years. So, you know, it's something that I'd like to see. Whether it will ever happen, that depends upon a lot of things that are well out of my control. But who knows? Keep your fingers crossed, and maybe one day.
Sean, who's the next person we have on the phone?
We have a friend of the show, Jim Lujan.
Jim Lujan.
Jim, what's up, buddy?
Hello, gentlemen.
You are on the air on FBR with Alan Moore, my friend. What's up?
I just wanted to say that I'm actually coming to the whole comic book party very late. I just picked up Watchmen this week.
Really?
Yes, and I'm about a third of the way through it, and I just wanted to tell Alan that it's fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, that's a blast from the past.
Absolutely, and this is coming from somebody who I mean, I've read a few graphic novels here and there. I'm not as familiar with the entire comic book genre as probably a lot of the callers are, but I just want to tell you that it's definitely a page turner. And had a friend lend me League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I read that as well. And now I see what the big hubbub is about. You really are the real deal.
Well, bless you. No, that's lovely, Jim. I mean, I suppose I could completely ruin the experience and just tell you like about Watchmen who did it. You know, I'll keep my peace on that one.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that question with a little something else then. Time magazine recently listed the top 100 novels of all time, and Watchmen made that list. And so I'm not disagreeing with Time, because I agree. I think it should have been higher on that list. But do you agree with that list, and do you think it's your greatest work?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, I've got the greatest of respect for Watchmen, and always will have. It was a fantastic work, and working with Dave Gibbons was terrific. You know, I was told about that list. Someone said that Watchmen had ended up at something like number 5, but for a couple of weeks it had been at number 1, which is, you know, I've got a very high opinion of myself. I mean, bordering upon megalomania. My vanity almost knows no bounds.
As it should.
But please, you know, sort of, one of the greatest 5 novels of all time, that is absurd.
Oh, no, it's not.
I mean, like, the thing is, you know, where was Herman Melville on the list? Where were all of the actually wonderful writers who... Yeah, I'm not saying that I'm immensely worse than them, but I find it difficult to respect a list of the 100 greatest novels of all time that doesn't mention... I mean, who was the winner? Do you remember?
Honestly, I don't even remember.
There was the actual Time staff list, which you were on, and then there was the readers list, and in the magazine you were number 1 on the readers list. Right now you are currently on number 5. I don't know who is number one on the
Well,
stat
Catch
list.
22 was up there for a little while.
Yeah.
So I don't remember what eventually became of that list, but is it almost a case of you saying you don't want to be a member of any club that would have you as a member?
Well, I suppose that, Groucho Marx's comment is applicable like that. But it's also that lists and popularity contests, I don't really tend to trust them very much because, it'll probably be, the audience has probably got not the greatest of short-term memories, or not the greatest of long-term memories, put it that way.
Uh-huh.
But sort of if you ask them for their favourite book, it will probably be something that they can remember reading. And so, no, I wouldn't play, it's very nice, it's very flattering, but it's not something that I place really any stock in. Watchmen, it's one of my favourite works, but the thing is that I can't really compare Watchmen with From Hell. I can't compare it with Lost Girls. They're such completely different works with completely different artists, with completely different intentions, that there's no way that I could compare them. I'm glad that Watchmen sort of still, has enduring popularity because that suggests that it was at least of its time and probably to a degree ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm.
If people can still be finding things in it now after all these years, then that's rewarding. But no, I don't think of it as my greatest work, and the fact that it did score so highly in that Time magazine poll, I really didn't think about that at all.
I think we're going to try and get one more caller, and then we'll get to some very fun questions.
Yeah, because we're kind of up against it time-wise. So who do we got? Sean.
Our next caller is Jordan from New York.
Jordan, we are on FBR with Alan Moore. What's up?
Hey, I just want to say that I've been a fan since the 7th grade when my math teacher let me not participate in math class so I can read Watchmen. And I'm not making that up. That actually happened.
You had a very enlightened 7th grade teacher, Jordan, obviously.
My question is about Lost Girls. I don't know if anybody's brought it up because I just got back from school, so I missed the first 40 minutes of the show. But do you think the press on Lost Girls is going to hinder somebody reading the book in any way, whether it be just all the negative press that's been about it, or just they go in thinking the wrong thing?
Good question.
We actually haven't really seen a great deal of negative press concerning Lost Girls. We've been quite startled by the fact that most of the press that we've seen has been incredibly positive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I suppose did concern me was that it's a very complex book. It's taken us 17 years to do, and that's because it's very intricate, it's very complex, it's very difficult to actually describe in a few words, because you're going to inevitably lose a lot of the nuances that make Lost Girls what it is. And I suppose that some of the descriptions of Lost Girls, and I'm sure these have been well meant, but they have focused upon the fact that, yes, it's got Alice and Dorothy and Wendy, these three beloved children's characters in it, and that it is pornography, and that there are scenes of what appears to be underage sex happening in it. Now, perhaps these are the most sensational points about the book, but that does tend to conjure an image of an 8-year-old Alice in Wonderland being horribly violated by a snark or something, which is pretty far from what Lost Girls is actually about. So I guess on that level, I've been slightly concerned that people didn't preconceive an image of what Lost Girls was going to be like based upon a few blurbs in a headline somewhere. That I would rather that I'd like to think that open-minded people, if they could read it themselves and then judge. I mean, like I say, we've had some incredibly positive response from this. I mean, we had the American Library Journal recommending it to all of the libraries in the U.S. for their adult sections. We had recently a piece of fantastic news where it was seized at the Canadian border.
That's right.
And Canada has, to some degree, much stricter, but actually much more well-defined obscenity laws than a lot of other countries.
That's right, and it actually the CBSA produced a wonderful review. It said that it was...
Yeah, we're going to put... I mean, if we do a future edition of Lost Girls where we've got blurbs all over the back cover, then we'll certainly have one talking about what a wonderful work of art it is and artistry and how everything in it is completely justified. And then we'll have the Canadian government.
That's right.
Underneath that,
yes.
you know.
It says an intricate, imaginative, and artfully rendered storyline. The portrayal
you have the quote there in front of you.
I do.
You can have that, yeah. An intricate and artfully rendered storyline, the Canadian government. That carries some weight. So, no, basically, I don't suppose I've got any real worries. I think that we have done a sufficiently beautiful job between us on Lost Girls that will, to some degree, ward off a lot of those kind of perhaps hasty first impressions that people might get from reading the odd headline here or there. It's a very alluring work, and I think that at the end of the day, that will possibly be its saving grace.
Thank you for your call. The next question comes from our list. What can you tell us about your upcoming appearance on The Simpsons?
Well, when they asked me about this, I told them that I was already slightly yellowish with huge bulging eyes so that I wouldn't have to spend that long in makeup. I don't want to blow any... I think the episode in question is going to be called Husbands and Knives.
Yes.
Because I think that partly it involves Homer getting cosmetic surgery. I am a subplot, although I think a particularly luminous subplot.
That's good.
That involves competition to the android dungeon arriving in Springfield, and there's a new hip comic shop that is having signings by hip creators such as my hip self and the terminally hip Art Spiegelman and Dan Klaus.
Excellent.
And at the end of it, I don't know whether this will make the final mix, but thanks to a suggestion by Melinda, I may end up giving a dramatic Shakespearean rendition of the lyrics to the Little Lulu theme song over the end credits. But that might end up on the cutting room floor. Perhaps The Simpsons isn't ready for that yet. I don't know.
And you're a huge fan. You're a huge fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been consistently funny for, what is it, nearly... How many years now? Nearly 15?
Oh, 17.
17, I mean.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, that is an incredible feat for any television show. And the fact that the humour has not really aged, that they've been able to keep fresh for such a long period, which has involved so much change in society, that anything that was less well-written or less conceived would have fallen by the wayside a decade ago.
Now,
so, yeah, my hat's off to the yellow folk of Springfield.
I'm also a big fan, but I'm even bigger fan of South Park. And I hear that you're also a fan as well. If they asked you to be on that show, would you accept?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, the only problem with being a South Park fan in this country, and if Trey Parker and Matt Stone happen to be listening,
yes,
do
possible.
something about your British DVD distribution, for God's sake. It's shameful. We're still on something like, Series 4.
Oh.
We've seen Series 5 over here, but that's it. It's all of a sudden, we're left in the air. We don't know how any of these haunting subplots resolve themselves, I mean, we do miss South Park over here. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not putting myself about or making an offer or trying to tempt them. But, I mean, should they offer, I would almost certainly say yes. But I don't think South Park I don't know. I mean, if George Clooney could play a gay dog,
right?
I'm sure that sort of some other sexually confused form of animal, I suppose that I'd be a natural for it in many ways. So, yeah, you know, I'll keep my diary open on that one.
Alan Moore, what are you reading right now, either comics or non-comic?
Well, the book that I've just finished is an incredible anthology by Ian Sinclair is the editor. It's called London City of Disappearances, and yes, I make an appearance in it, so that was one of the reasons why I was reading it, because of my morbid self-infatuation. But on the other hand, it's one of the best anthologies I've ever read. It's got people like Michael Moorcock in there. It's got this entire secret history of a lost London. So in terms of fiction and of non-comics writing, that's what I've been reading recently. I mean, in terms of comics, I think the last thing that I read and enjoyed was Eddie Campbell's latest work, The Fate of the Artist, which made me worry about Eddie, because I haven't spoken to him for a while, and I wondered whether he was keeping on the rails, but I'm sure he is, and it's a fantastic piece of work. I mean, there's other books that I'm looking forward to reading. I mean, Melinda's just recommended the Alison Bechtel Fun Hunt book,
yes,
which I'm told is a marvellous literary piece of work. And so I'm very much looking forward to reading that. There's probably other books and comics that I've read which I shall remember at the moment. I'll put the phone down, but sort of, those are some of the most recent things that I've read.
Now, we would love to thank you for all of your work. We'd love to thank, really, Melinda also. I don't know if she's there. If we can just say thank you to her really quickly.
If you'd like to, I shall summon her to the phone for you, and sort of, she can talk to your readership. Just give me 2 moments here.
Okay.
Sure. Oliver, we're talking to Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is probably I'm going to walk straight out of here, and a bus is going to hit me.
Hi,
hello.
Miss Gabby.
Yes.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
We are excellent because we're speaking with you.
Oh, that's good. That's very cozy. Thank you.
Your work on Lost Girls is amazing. You do an amazing job. Thank you for it. Thank you for your work. Can you tell us quickly any influences that you have and how you came about the style of Lost Girls?
Well, let's see. Starting with Monet, Klimt, for Jules Pfeiffer, Harvey Kurtzman, Bill Ward, actually, on some levels, Wally Wood, who else? Just lots of people, lots of painters, and lots of cartoonists, and I stole from everybody.
You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
And thank you. I hope you're having a wonderful evening over there in Northampton.
Yes, it is. Center of Britain.
Center of the universe right now.
That's right.
Oh, yay for us.
And I wanted to say thank you. I know you had an important interview at the same time as this one, and so I appreciate putting us on first there. That was excellent.
It's just another sex magazine. You're much more.
Well, we'll say goodbye to you. We'll say goodbye to Alan very quickly, if that's okay.
Okay, sure enough. Hold on. And it was very nice talking to you.
Very nice talking to you.
Very nice talking to you.
Okay, thank you both. Bye.
Bye.
Wowzers.
Right, I'm back.
Well, we have to wrap up.
Just me doing Melinda's voice. In the room here. Yeah.
Now, I've heard Alan Moore impressions, but that's the first Melinda Gabby impression. Alan Moore. I can't tell you what an honor it is. It's truly great. We're all kind of starstruck here, and your work is so profound, so important. You've moved us in so many ways, and we thank you for your time, but more importantly, for your work.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm just an ordinary guy. I put my pants on 7 legs at a time, and everybody else. You know?
Well, we can tell you that Lost Girls is out by Top Shelf Productions, and it's all over the North America now.
Yeah, you can
Thank
get
goodness.
it.
You can get it.
If you're listening to us now, you can go get it. Except for you, Jordan. You ain't old enough. Don't go get it.
18 and over, right, Alan?
That's right, 18 or over.
That's right. And
sorry, kids.
And another volume of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by America's Best Comics will be in store sometime in 2007, we guess?
I guess so. I mean, Kevin's about 16 pages away from the end. It is the most exquisite work by him that I've ever seen. So I promise you that it will be worth the wait.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
And we'd like to thank everybody, all of you who sent in questions and called in.
And thank you, Oliver. Thank you, TJ.
Hey.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
Thanks, Britta. Thanks, Meg. Thank you, Melinda, Gabby, and thank you, Alan Moore, again, finally.
Hey, well, thanks very much, guys. It's been a very pleasant experience. We must do it again sometime.
I think we will.
And I'm going to hold you to that, man.
Okay.